See, that program cost taxpayers more than $400 million over the last 5 years. But the feds say in a lot of cases, providers billed Medicaid for things they never did.
At 4:32 a.m. along a fog-draped stretch of the California coastline, the Pacific moved quietly against cliffs rarely seen by the public. 17 nautical miles offshore, beyond routine patrol routes and hidden behind layers of corporate ownership, sat a private island known internally to federal intelligence as Serenity Cove. What appeared on paper to be an exclusive estate was registered to two globally celebrated figures, Amina Hassan Osman, 49, and her husband Ibrahim Khalid Rashid, 51. To the public, they were humanitarian leaders. Their organization, Hope Horizon International, claimed to have rescued more than 22,000 orphaned and displaced children over 8 years. They spoke at international forums, received awards from state officials, and were praised as symbols of compassion across continents. But beneath the recognition, analysts had begun to see gaps. Thousands of children associated with Hope Horizon programs had no follow-up records, no school enrollments, no repatriation documentation, no trace in any international database. At least 3,412 cases simply ended in silence. 4 years, those absences were attributed to administrative delays, conflict zones, or poor record keeping. That explanation ended 3 weeks earlier. During a separate financial investigation into large-scale money laundering, federal agents seized encrypted servers linked to the foundation's internal operations. What emerged from those systems forced an immediate escalation. Shipping manifests, encrypted payment schedules, and a classified designation that unsettled even veteran investigators. Operation Innocence Trade. This was not charity. It was a structured trafficking operation disguised as humanitarian relief. By the early hours of this morning, more than 200 federal agents from the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security investigations were assembled offshore, preparing to breach Serenity Cove simultaneously by land, sea, and air. The objective was no longer surveillance. It was recovery. At 4:47 a.m., Coast Guard interceptors and FBI tactical watercraft powered down 600 meters from shore. Above them, 2 helicopters hovered in blackout mode, rotors cutting through the mist without navigation lights. On the command vessel, a quiet transmission confirmed authorization. The operation was live. Teams moved in from 4 directions at once. As agents advanced through dense coastal terrain, they immediately encountered resistance from armed private security positioned near the eastern dock. Flash devices detonated. Controlled fire was returned. Within minutes, the contractors were restrained and the perimeter secured. The estate itself came into view. The main structure was not a residence in the conventional sense. It was fortified. Cameras covered every approach. Motion sensors lined the grounds. Steel-reinforced doors protected the lower levels. This was a facility designed for control, not comfort. Inside the mansion's primary wing, agents forced entry into a locked room that functioned as a live command center. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time video feeds from multiple locations: cargo ports, logistics warehouses, private airstrips. One display showed rows of small numbered rooms, each containing a narrow bed and a surveillance camera. Children were visible on the screens. The order from command was immediate: secure the servers. Preserve everything. As teams cleared the lower floors, a concealed stairwell was discovered behind reinforced panels, leading deep underground. The access door required biometric clearance. It was breached. Beyond it was a sterile corridor lined with numbered steel doors. Inside those rooms were children. Dozens of them. Silent, disoriented, some crying softly, others motionless. None carried identification. Many spoke different languages. All showed signs of prolonged confinement. By 5:18 a.m., 87 children had been secured from the underground facility alone. Medical teams were called in. Blankets were distributed. Agents spoke quietly, repeating the same words again and again. They were safe now. But the discovery of the holding rooms was only the beginning. Adjacent to the facility, agents opened a locked storage vault. Inside were thousands of detailed files. Each contained a photograph, fabricated personal histories, medical summaries, and pricing data linked to offshore accounts across multiple jurisdictions. The children had been cataloged, evaluated, and assigned transaction codes. In a separate office upstairs, surrounded by framed humanitarian awards, agents located Osman and Rashid. They were seated calmly, shredding documents. Hard drives on the desk were still warm. When confronted, there was no resistance. Within minutes, both were taken into federal custody. No statements were made. No cameras were present. And as dawn began to break over the Pacific, investigators understood that Serenity Cove was not an isolated crime scene. It was the visible center of something far larger, far more organized, and far more disturbing than a single island operation. The scale of what had been uncovered was only beginning to come into focus. By 7:03 a.m., Serenity Cove was under full federal control. The island's perimeter remained sealed as forensic teams moved room by room, documenting evidence, imaging servers, and cataloging every digital system that had been running beneath the appearance of a luxury retreat. What agents uncovered confirmed their worst assumptions. The estate was not just a holding site. It was a command node. In the underground command center, cyber analysts began decrypting the seized servers. As access was gained, a detailed digital network unfolded across multiple screens. It was not a list of crimes. It was an operational map. Routes, assets, timelines, financial corridors. At the center of the system was a single designation repeated across files and folders: Project Mercy Corridor. The name was deliberate. Project Mercy Corridor was not limited to one island or one foundation. It was a transnational infrastructure built to move children across borders under the cover of humanitarian aid, refugee resettlement, and international adoption programs. The system relied on legitimacy, not secrecy. Analysts traced the structure outward. More than 40 shell companies and nonprofit fronts were embedded across 7 countries. Each appeared compliant on paper. Tax filings were current. Donor reports were polished. Testimonials praised life-changing impact. None of it reflected reality. Among the identified fronts were a private adoption consultancy in Nevada, a refugee services organization in Washington state, a shipping and cargo firm operating through Los Angeles ports, and an education trust based in San Francisco. Individually, each entity looked ordinary. Together they formed a closed circuit. Every organization funneled people, money, and documentation into the same concealed pipeline. Financial analysts followed the money. Over 8 years, Hope Horizon International had processed more than $680 million in grants, donations, and international aid funding. Yet less than 12% could be linked to verifiable program expenses. The remainder moved through offshore accounts in the British Virgin Islands, Switzerland, and Dubai. Funds were laundered through real estate purchases, luxury vehicle leases, private art acquisitions, and investment vehicles that existed only as legal constructs. One investigator summarized it plainly. This was not mismanagement. It was design. The most disturbing evidence emerged when analysts cross-referenced flight manifests, cargo shipping logs, and travel authorizations linked to Hope Horizon's international programs. Between 2018 and 2026, the Foundation coordinated more than 300 international transport missions. Officially, these were youth exchanges, refugee relocations, and educational travel initiatives. In practice, they were trafficking routes protected by humanitarian exemptions, diplomatic waivers, and pre-cleared customs approvals. The process followed a consistent pattern. Children were collected from refugee camps in East Africa and the Middle East. They were transported to staging facilities in California, Nevada, and Washington under the guise of temporary care or evaluation. From there, they were processed through fabricated adoption agencies or education programs. Final transfers occurred via private yachts, charter aircraft, or cargo vessels. Destinations included regions in Asia, Europe, and the Gulf states. At every stage, falsified documentation created the appearance of legitimacy. The system did not avoid the law. It operated alongside it. One senior investigator later explained that the network had not merely exploited legal frameworks. It had replicated them. A parallel structure existed, complete with approvals, compliance language, and procedural checks that appeared valid to anyone reviewing a single step. Inside one encrypted drive, agents discovered a file labeled Phase 3 Expansion Proposal. The document outlined plans to scale operations further. Additional nonprofit partnerships. New processing hubs in Texas and Florida. Embedded operatives within immigration review boards to accelerate approvals during border surges. The projected target was 10,000 children per year by 2028. Projected annual revenue exceeded $2 billion. This was not impulsive criminal behavior. It was industrial-scale exploitation planned with corporate precision. As analysts absorbed the implications, the investigation crossed a threshold. What began as a recovery operation had become a national emergency. The question was no longer whether action was required. The question was how far the network extended, and how many people were already positioned to move before the system could be shut down. Within hours, federal leadership authorized the next phase. A coordinated response unlike anything attempted before. And it would unfold all at once. At 9:14 a.m. inside a secure federal operations center in downtown Los Angeles, a massive digital map filled the main wall. Red markers pulsed across California, Nevada, Arizona, Washington, and Oregon. Each point represented a location tied to Project Mercy Corridor. Safe houses, logistics hubs, storage facilities, private airstrips, maritime routes. This was no longer analysis. This was execution. Senior leadership authorized a synchronized enforcement action later identified internally as Operation Shattered Trust. More than 12,000 federal personnel from the FBI, DEA, DHS, ATF, and the U.S. Marshal Service were placed on immediate standby. The objective was absolute disruption. No staggered arrests. No warnings. No opportunity for evidence removal. At exactly 10 a.m. Pacific Time, the operation began. In Los Angeles, SWAT teams breached a nondescript warehouse near the port of Long Beach registered to Bright Horizon Logistics. Inside, agents encountered a fully operational staging facility. Rows of bunk beds. Medical examination stations. Clothing inventories. A scheduling board listing maritime departure windows to Southeast Asia. 42 children between the ages of 7 and 14 were recovered. They had been told they were awaiting educational placement interviews. In reality, they were scheduled for shipment. Agents seized over $3 million in cash, falsified passports, and encrypted devices linked to overseas contacts. In Sacramento, agents raided a luxury estate hidden behind a shell ownership structure. The property appeared vacant until a concealed basement entrance was discovered behind a wine cellar wall. Below ground, 63 children were confined in cramped quarters. Surveillance footage showed repeated visits by well-dressed individuals who reviewed files and departed with selected children. Investigators described the site with one word: showroom. In Nevada, ICE agents supported by Customs and Border Protection air units descended on a remote private airstrip outside Las Vegas. 2 jets were being prepared for departure. Passenger manifests listed youth delegates bound for Dubai and Hong Kong. Agents halted the aircraft minutes before takeoff and recovered 29 children from the cabins. Pilots and crew were detained on the runway. Inside the terminal office, agents uncovered client contracts, wire transfer confirmations, and delivery logs spanning 3 years. The documentation matched files recovered from Serenity Cove exactly. In San Francisco, FBI cyber teams stormed the headquarters of the New Dawn Education Trust. Employees were in the middle of a meeting when agents entered. Computers were seized. Phones were confiscated. Filing cabinets were emptied. Inside were donor materials featuring photographs of smiling children. None of those children had ever been enrolled in any program. The images had been sourced from stock libraries or staged events. The trust existed solely to generate credibility and move money. In Washington state, Coast Guard vessels intercepted a luxury yacht preparing to depart under cover of fog near Port Townsend. The vessel, registered to a Panamanian shell company, carried 38 children described as humanitarian program participants. When the crew resisted, gunfire was exchanged. 2 crew members were wounded. The rest surrendered. In the yacht's cargo hold, agents recovered narcotics packed alongside the children's luggage. Methamphetamine. Fentanyl pills. The same routes that moved children were being used to move drugs under identical protections. By 2:47 p.m., the coordinated raids concluded. Across all locations, 450 children were recovered. 87 suspects were arrested. Millions in cash were seized. Narcotics shipments were intercepted. Private vessels and aircraft were impounded. Thousands of falsified documents were taken into evidence. The network suffered more damage in 6 hours than it had in 6 years. But as investigators compiled the results, one question overshadowed every briefing. How had this system operated for nearly a decade without being stopped? The answer emerged later that evening. And it cut deeper than anyone expected. By early evening, attention shifted from the raids themselves to the evidence they produced. At 6:21 p.m., inside a secured FBI evidence processing facility, forensic analysts began reviewing thousands of seized files, emails, and encrypted communications. What they uncovered reframed the entire case. The network had not survived through secrecy alone. It had survived because it had help. Cross-referencing communications with personnel records revealed a pattern of internal compromise spanning multiple levels of government. Over a 3-year period, at least 34 officials across federal, state, and local agencies had facilitated the operation, some knowingly, others through pressure or inducement. 7 immigration case officers expedited refugee and youth placement approvals without completing required reviews. 5 Port Authority inspectors consistently cleared cargo during late-night departure windows without secondary screening. 9 Child Protective Services coordinators closed placement cases prematurely, falsifying follow-up reports. The list continued. 6 Customs and Border agents approved travel documents for children with incomplete guardianship records. 4 county judges signed emergency custody transfers without reviewing supporting evidence. 3 state legislators received campaign contributions from organizations linked to Hope Horizons financial network. Every action left a trace. Payments appeared as consulting fees, gifts, or political donations. Some officials accepted cash. Others accepted favors or access. The method varied, but the outcome was the same. Oversight was neutralized from within. Internal emails captured the culture that allowed it. When junior staff questioned irregular placement patterns or unusual travel authorizations, they were instructed to prioritize humanitarian throughput and avoid delays. 1 immigration officer who refused to approve a questionable batch of documents was reassigned within weeks. His replacement approved the same documents without comment. A port inspector who requested additional screening for a suspicious cargo shipment was told the request was statistically insignificant and not aligned with operational priorities. The shipment was cleared. The system did not silence dissent through threats. It isolated it through procedure. Analysts concluded that Project Mercy Corridor functioned because accountability was diffused. No single decision appeared catastrophic. Each approval seemed minor. Each exception felt temporary. Together, they formed a continuous pathway through which children and narcotics moved unchallenged. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the architecture became. This was not corruption at the edges. It was coordination at the center. Records showed that compromised officials were not random. They occupied positions critical to speed and discretion. Placement review, cargo clearance, custody authorization, campaign influence. The network targeted pressure points where a single signature could accelerate movement without attracting attention. As these findings were consolidated, federal leadership prepared for the final phase. Not more raids, but accountability. Internal affairs units were activated. Prosecutorial task forces were assembled. Evidence packages were prepared for sealed indictments. Officials who had once approved paperwork quietly were now facing federal scrutiny themselves. For investigators, the most difficult realization was not how much money had changed hands. It was how often warning signs had appeared, and how consistently they had been dismissed. The operation had not depended on fear. It had depended on convenience. And as the night progressed, it became clear that the final chapter of Project Mercy Corridor would not focus on traffickers alone, but on the systems and decisions that allowed them to operate unchecked for years. As midnight approached, federal officials gathered for the final internal briefing. The scale of what had been uncovered no longer fit into a single operation or a single case file. Project Mercy Corridor was not just dismantled. It was exposed. What investigators emphasized most was intent. This was not a failure caused by chaos or neglect. It was a system built deliberately, refined over years, and protected by credibility. The network did not rely on secrecy alone. It relied on reputation, paperwork, and the assumption that institutions labeled as humanitarian must be acting in good faith. That assumption proved costly. Internal review boards concluded that the operation survived because responsibility was fragmented. Aviation authorities focused on aircraft safety. Immigration offices focused on processing speed. Child services focused on placement volume. Financial regulators reviewed transactions in isolation. Each system functioned as designed, but none saw the whole picture. Trust replaced verification. The traffickers understood this better than anyone. They built a parallel framework that mirrored legitimate systems closely enough to pass routine scrutiny. Forms were complete. Reviews were expedited. Oversight was assumed. Nothing appeared urgent enough to challenge. Behind that normalcy, children were treated as inventory. Recovered records showed how language removed humanity from decision-making. Files listed units, allocations, and delivery status. Lives were reduced to metrics. Transfers were logged like shipments. Absence was recorded as closure. For survivors, recovery began slowly and quietly. Medical teams continued long after the raids ended. Psychological care was prioritized. Legal protections were secured. Many children struggled to understand that movement had stopped, that no further transfer was coming. Safety had to be demonstrated repeatedly, patiently. Families overseas were contacted where records allowed. For some, the truth brought answers after years of silence. For others, it brought the painful realization that loved ones might never be located. Investigators documented each case carefully, aware that closure would not be universal. As accountability measures moved forward, officials were measured in their public statements. No policy change could undo the harm already done. But reforms were initiated. Cross-agency verification requirements were strengthened. Humanitarian transport programs were subjected to deeper review. Data systems were updated to flag disappearance, not ignore it. The goal was not suspicion. It was connection. One senior investigator summarized the lesson during the final briefing. This did not happen because no one cared. It happened because everyone assumed someone else was watching. That observation defined the case's legacy. Project Mercy Corridor demonstrated how exploitation can hide inside professionalism, how harm can move quietly through respected channels, and how systems designed for compassion can be misused when oversight weakens. The operation ended, but the responsibility did not. What unfolded off the California coast and across multiple states forced a reckoning with uncomfortable truths. That trust must be paired with accountability. That credibility must be tested. And that vigilance is not optional, even when intentions appear noble. For the survivors, the future will not be measured in reports or statistics. It will be measured in stability restored gradually, one step at a time. And for the institutions involved, the mandate is clear. When systems stop asking questions, people disappear.